Heather from the World Bank, and today we're going to be doing our last Knitting for Beginners video, and we're going to go over a couple topics and try and wrap everything up together so you can get kind of a cohesive look at reading a pattern, knitting it, and then finishing up a project. And then we're going to go a little bit more into detail about different yarn weights and needle sizes and how that affects your finished product and how it will look in terms of gauge and the structure of the work. But first we'll get started with lace knitting, and we'll go a little bit more into that, but this is the sample we're going to start with. And lace knitting is essentially creating intentional holes in your work in a decorative pattern like this. And we're going to read this pattern along together with you and show you how a chart will work to create this pattern in lace knitting. Just to preface a little bit, I'm going to show you the different weights of yarn again. We talked about this a little bit when we did our intro videos, but you kind of probably have a little more experience at this point and have seen it in your own patterns and swatches and everything, how different thicknesses look versus thicker yarn and thinner yarn and everything like that. So first to start, I actually have kind of a bag that has them all listed out, so you can see the different weights of yarn and what they're called. And then slightly confusing is that sometimes they have different names, like I think light is sometimes considered sport weight or something like that, and then medium I think is worsted weight. So there's different names that mean the same thing with different weights of yarn, but it should be kind of a standard thickness, and then they just kind of have different terms that you will get used to over time. But this is the thinnest weight, which is lace weight, which is what we'll be kind of talking about a bit more today, and then it goes all the way to jumbo, and then like bulky, super bulky, or some of the thicker types of yarn. So this one is actually a bulky weight yarn, and you can tell it's pretty thick when you hold it up to here. This one is a worsted weight, it's slightly thinner, and then I think this one is sport weight, which would be light on here, and that one you can definitely tell it's starting to get thinner. So you can compare these two, and they're a lot different if I hold them over this. And then we have a really small sample of what a lace weight would be, which is this one. That's super thin compared to the other ones. And then this other sample is an alpaca yarn, and it's hard for me to get out a single string of this, but it's also super thin and considered lace weight, and you may hold it with something else, which we've also shown in other videos to thicken it up a little bit, or you can knit with just this and it'll be a nice fluffy thin fabric. So that's an option too. So oftentimes with lace knitting, you may be using really small needles to kind of keep the gauge tighter, so something like this. But you can use thicker needles to create a more holy fabric. So we've knit up this sample here that really shows you the difference of we're just using the same size or same weight of yarn. This is a lace weight yarn, and we start off with a really small needle. This one is a US 0. So that's the first segment here, but then we slowly increase the size of the needle as the sample goes on, and you can see that the sample is getting wider, and then also each section is getting longer. So by keeping the same weight yarn and then increasing your needle size, you're changing the gauge and you're changing how your swatch is looking. So it looks a lot more holy and stretchy at the top when you're using a bigger needle with thin yarn. Whereas here it's nice and tight, not as stretchy, and it kind of depends, what type of drape of fabric you're looking for. So you can see again, we've shown you different needle sizes before, but this would be a US 5, this is a US 8, this is another US 8, and then this one I don't know, but you can tell it's thicker. This is probably a US 10 or something like that. So these are kind of, the bigger needle size you do with the same weight yarn, the holier the fabric will be, stretchier, and wider area. So gone over the different weights of yarn again as a refresher, and there is lace weight yarn, but there's also what is known as lace knitting, which is not the type of yarn, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It's just an ornamental stitch pattern, which you can see here, that creates holes in your work on purpose, and you place them accordingly so that it is like a repeating pattern and you know, a nice visual motif. And we'll go through reading a pattern that has a chart and lace knitting all in one. So we'll get started with that. Just the basics on chart reading is that you start from, you read from right to left, and then this is the like stitch count here at the bottom. So they have 15 stitches here, but I'm just going to be doing this repeated section. And then these are the rows. So they go from 1 to 16 here. So when you start to read this, you start in this bottom right corner, and then you're going from right to left. So when there's nothing in the box, that just means to knit that stitch. And this is looking at it from the right side of the work. So I've already started this swatch, but since I'm on the right side here, I will just knit this first row, reading from right to left. And I'll meet you on the end of the row, but this is an easy one to follow the first row pattern on this chart. About these last couple stitches, we're just knitting all the way through. And now, since I'm at the end of the row, I have to turn it over since we're knitting flat. And this is where it'll be a little confusing with this chart since we're knitting flat, but the next row is also all knit stitches. But this is looking at it from the right side of the work. So because we're on the wrong side, we're going to need to purl this whole row, and then on the right side it'll look like a knit stitch. Okay, so we're at the end, and I'm just going to purl the last stitch and get us back to the front of the row, or front of the work. So now we're on the third row in this chart here, because we're going from the bottom up is how we're reading it, and then going from right to left. So sometimes I'll use like a post-it and I'll block off the lower parts once I've done them, but like you could just use something to kind of keep your way once you're getting into the more complicated parts. So I'm just going to use this needle right now for that. So now it's saying you have to knit the first 3 stitches, and then this circle marking in this pattern means a yarn over, which I'll show you how to do that in a second, but that's the essence of lace knitting, is a lot of yarn overs. And then that creates a new stitch, so then you have to decrease the number of stitches again. So this symbol means slip, slip, knit, which is a type of decrease that you can do, reducing 2 stitches down to 1. So knit 3 stitches, yarn over, slip, slip, knit, and then we're knitting 6 stitches, yarn over, slip, slip, knit, and then knit 2 to finish it out. Cool. Okay, so we're going to go through this row, but first, just quick note, this box here is representing this 8-stitch repeat that's going to happen throughout the whole, I guess, horizontal section of your work. So every 8 stitches, you'll be repeating the pattern on this chart. So this box represents that repeated section. So in this case, I'm making a really small swatch, so it looks pretty much the same as what the chart is looking like right now, but if you're repeating this over a large number of stitches in like a circumference of a sweater or something, like if you're doing the neck and it has this motif at the top on the raglan part or anything like that, then you would be just, rather than having like a really, really long pattern, you're just gonna use like this chart and repeat it over and over again. So that's why they indicate to you what the 8-stitch repeat is, so that you can always just be repeating that over a large number of stitches. You could have like 100 stitches on your needles and just repeat this over and over again. So that's how you read a chart and how you use it in a bigger project like a sweater. Okay, so like we said, when I'm reading this chart, it's saying to knit 3 because I have those 3 empty boxes. So I will knit 3. And now I'm at my first instruction, which is a circle, which you'll have like a key somewhere on the pattern on what each symbol means, but in this case, it's going to mean yarn over. So to do a yarn over, this is a new skill, you move the working yarn to the front of your needle, and then you just proceed with your next stitch like normal, but you know how normally when you knit a stitch, your yarn is in the back of the work? In this case, you just leave it in the front and it's gonna wrap around your needle and create a new stitch. So next we wanna do this slip slip knit, which is a left leaning decrease. To do that, this is also new, you slip the yarn you put your needle into the front leg of it and you slip it over to your right needle. And then same thing for the next stitch. And then what I do is I put my left needle through the front 2 legs here. And then I wrap this around to knit like normal. But you see how I'm creating this loop? That's your yarn over that's happening at the same time. So it's a little complicated, but you can see we have a new yarn over, which the hole is already kind of there, you can see it. And then these 2 stitches have joined together and you decreased. So that's the essence of lace knitting, because every time you create this new stitch, you have to decrease by 1 in order to keep your total stitch count the same. So I'll keep going and I have to knit 6 stitches now. Is here, so I'll keep going with that. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to do 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I'm just going to double check so I can see my decrease here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 knit stitches. And then the next step is to do another yarn over here. So to do that, we move the yarn from back to front and you just leave it there. And then the next step is to do the slip slip knit decrease, which you do by going and move this first stitch over to your right needle using the front leg. And then same thing for the second stitch. And then you go back into the front leg with your left needle. And then you don't pull it off yet, you wrap this around like you're knitting. And then you've decreased and made a left leaning decrease there, and you've got your yarn over, so that's good. And then this pattern, or the chart for some reason only goes to 15 stitches, but I had cast on 16, so I'm just gonna knit the last 3 to finish it out. But it'll be more of a seamless transition if you're knitting in the round and on a bigger swatch. So that's the beginning of our lace knitting section of the chart. So we'll keep going on the next row, and I'm just gonna like move it up here. And then you can see the next row is gonna be all knit on the right side. So since I'm on the wrong side, I'll purl through this whole row real quick to finish out the 4th row of the chart. And you can see, so I just got to the yarn over, and it looks kind of weird, but you still just purl into it like normal. And then that'll kind of tighten things up. So I'll do the next stitch just to show you. So now it's tightened up and it's more of a, you know, real circle at this point instead of just a loop. So I'll keep going with purling. And again, I'm about to get to the yarn over. So you still treat it like normal and you just go through this bigger hole here, still from back to front, and then purl. and then purl my last stitch. All right, so now this one's going to be a little more complicated. This is the 5th row of the chart, and to start, we're going to knit 1 stitch, and then this is a right leaning decrease. So to do that, that's a knit 2 together stitch, which is slightly different than the slip slip knit, and I'll show you that. And then we have a yarn over, a couple yarn overs, and then the same pattern is going to repeat over here. So let's get started. First, just the first knit stitch, and then this is the knit 2 together. So to do that, you just use your right needle to go into the next 2 stitches, like as if you were going to knit them both. So you don't go into just this one, you go into the second one in and through both of those loops. And then you wrap the yarn around like normal, and then you've now knit them both together. And you can see it's right leaning, so the front stitch is going to the right. And then the next step is a yarn over. So to do that, I move the yarn from back to front, and then I do my next stitch, which is just a knit stitch. And you can see it's making the yarn over here, and then I'm knitting the next stitch. And then we need to do another yarn over, so I move my yarn from back to front, and I'm gonna do a slip slip knit decrease, which is the left leaning one. So I go like this into the front leg of the first stitch, move it over. Same thing for the second stitch. I go back into the front leg of both of those, and then I wrap my yarn around to knit. Okay, so we finished that pattern repeat, and it always looks a little weird, but you can go back and kind of count your stitches to make sure you're in the right spot. So I can see I've knit 1, then I have my decrease 1, I have my yarn over, I have a knit stitch, another yarn over, and then this is my decrease 1. So we have 6 stitches, 2, 4, 6, which is where we need to be. So that's good to check sometimes to make sure you're in the right spot. And then the next 3 stitches I'm gonna knit according to the chart. And then we're gonna do a knit 2 together decrease again. And then the yarn over, so I move my yarn from back to front, and then I'm going to need to knit my next stitch, and then we need another yarn over, so from back to front, and then we do the slip slip knit decrease, and then again, I have 16 stitches, so I'll knit 1, but then I'm going to knit 1 extra one. So you can see we have our new yarn overs here. So we're about halfway through this motif, and then I'll finish it out right now doing the purl row, and then we have one more patterned row to do in this section. So we flip over to the back again. And I'm going to move up 1 row, and since it's knit on the right side, we need to purl all the way across on the wrong side. And these in-between rows are kind of necessary sometimes in lace knitting to kind of keep the yarn overs under control, so they don't get too stretched out and loopy. That was the 6th row in this chart, and we're just going to do this one here to complete this little section. So it says to start by knitting the first 3 stitches, and this is actually the same as the row 3 down here that we did earlier. So I've knit 3, and now we need to do a yarn over. So I move the yarn from back to front, and the next step is the slip slip knit, so I start doing that as well, moving that stitch over. Same with the second one. Pick them up again and then knit like normal. And then we need to knit 6 more stitches. 1, 2, 5, 6. And then we've reached this part of the pattern now, so we need another yarn over. So I moved my yarn from back to front, and then we need to do the slip slip knit decrease right after, so I'll do that. And then go back in through the front loops and wrap your working yarn around the needle. So we have our yarn over and the decrease right after. And then to finish out the row, I'm going to knit the last couple of stitches. And ta-da! We have an almost complete motif. I'll just purl the one last row, so row 8, and then you'll be able to see it a little more clearly. So finishing this out, and let's see where we are. We've got another set of 2 little flowers, kind of, or shamrocks or something, whatever motif you want to call it. So you can see how lace knitting will create these kind of patterns, and how chart reading makes it a little bit easier, and then how there will be repeating sections of the pattern horizontally, but then also once you finish this chart, your pattern may say to, you know, repeat the chart a certain number of times. So like once you get to the top, you just go back to the bottom and then keep going up again. So yeah, that's the basic of chart reading, and how it can be useful in a pattern that has a repeating design like this. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us with this one. This is our last video on knitting for beginners, and we went over different yarn weights that we started off with kind of at the very beginning, but applied it with our sample here, and then learned how to do lace knitting, which is actually kind of a pretty advanced skill, but it only requires a couple new stitches to learn. And then chart reading and pattern reading itself is also important for any work that you're doing, so kind of put it all together into one sample here with this lace knitting sample, but it's something to try out for your next project, and then, you know, apply these skills to any project in terms of reading patterns and, charts and everything like that. So again, thanks so much for watching, and if you're looking for any more help with anything, we'll be doing in-person classes most likely, but thanks for joining.